Good morning, Dan and Amy. So while Trump was in Harrisburg, PA, Hassan Minhaj, who is a correspondent for The Daily Show, yes, it's still on the air.
And who is he? Yeah, correspondent?
Yeah, he was the featured comedian at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and he had some good riffs on the press. When he turned his sights to the D.C. press corps, he made some good points in an entertaining way, starting with how the press has lost the trust of the people.
I mean, unlike Anderson Cooper's bone structure, you guys have been far from perfect. Remember election night? I mean, that was your Steve Harvey Miss Universe moment. The look on your faces at 11 p.m. on election night, it was like walking into a Panera Bread and finding out your sixth grade teacher has a part-time job there. I was like, what? Mr. Leddington? I guess you don't have all the answers.
And
You don't have a side hustle?
And on MSNBC?
I had a lot more MSNBC jokes, but I don't want to just ramble on. Otherwise, I might get a show on MSNBC.
And on CNN.
Tonight, CNN is here, baby. Now, you guys got some really weird trust issues going on with the public. I'm not going to call you fake news, but everything isn't breaking news. Yeah, you can't go to DEF CON 1 just because Sanjay Gupta found a new moisturizer.
So there was some good stuff there.
Oh, I love that. My favorite's the Wolf Blitzer when he characterized how he handles his own show.
Yeah, it's the whole, hey, take a minute, take an hour, understand what's actually happening before you rush to the airwaves hyperventilating about a story. Yeah, about a story that isn't fully formed. That's a good point as well. Well, it's one of the points that Ohio Governor John Kasich makes in his new book. He tackles the media and how the media distorts the American dialogue. The book is Two Paths, America Divided or United. And we're pleased to be joined again by former Republican presidential candidate and Ohio Governor John Kasich. Governor Kasich, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So why don't we just stick to the media piece of it first in terms of the larger argument that you make in your book. How do you come down on the D.C. press corps and its influence and what needs to be addressed with respect to how the D.C. press corps does its job?
Yeah, well, first of all, in a free society, you need a robust media. I mean, the first thing that happens in societies where they're trying to crack down, I'm just reading about Turkey and how this guy's just arresting everybody. You've got to be very, very careful over there if you're in the press. And so a robust press is good, but I also think press has a responsibility. And so one of the things that I wrote about is that I called a network executive and said, look, you made $1 billion covering the election, and now they're going to push you to make another $1 billion. And, when you do that, if you try to do that, I hope you can look yourself in the mirror, because during the campaign, I mean, there were networks that focused on an empty podium in anticipation of seeing Trump, and I mean, I've never seen anything like it. So the media has a very significant responsibility to cover the news and to be in a position of we're not hyping it up just to make money. And the other thing, though, that's important is that we, as consumers of the news, should not just consume that news that we agree with. And so, one of my friends suggested that every American ought to spend 10 minutes a day reading something that they don't agree with. Mm-hmm. Because as we consume things that we agree with and become more and more convinced that we're right and everybody else is wrong, it leads to a fractured society. And we have people in this country and families and neighbors are fighting with one another over some stupid political stuff.
Oh, I know. I've been there. So do you think this love-hate relationship between President Trump and the media is just a part of a way to get ratings, and it's part of a reality TV world that we live in?
Press, and I think the press, they don't like it, but, if you're in the press, you just do your job and don't get too worked up about the fact that people are criticizing you, although I can tell you that I have found, to my surprise, really to my surprise, that there are very informed, very successful, very wealthy people who don't know what to believe when they read because they say everything is biased. Now, we know in the press that, you have a particular point of view, but, consume multiple things. Just don't believe your news feed. Just don't believe, one sort of thing that gets sent to you. I always like to laugh and say that I believe virtually nothing of what I read and only half of what I see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but at the D.C. press corps, this whole kind of what's fake news and what isn't, I find rather tiresome. But Holman Jenkins' piece in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, I find to be very insightful. And his point is this. It's not about fake news or not fake news, and it's not about Trump versus the D.C. press corps. It's about the job the Fourth Estate does in distilling public policy discussions, which is to say it doesn't. It doesn't do costs and benefits. It doesn't do the choices before us and the implications of choices. It does sob stories. And Jenkins' conclusion is that the most anti-reform institution in this country, despite all the protestations about the challenges we face, is the media, because they're in the business of being, frankly, handmaidens to big government, regardless of party.
Well, I don't agree with that at all.
Okay.
I just don't agree with that or your view on that. I don't think that's fair. I think that, if you read The Atlantic or The New Yorker, I mean, these articles some of them are like 10 pages long, and they're filled with a lot of good information. If you take the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, it has a lot, and you're just quoting one guy, it has a lot of provocative and things that are, pretty substantive. If you read the review section of the New York Times on Sunday, where they have multiple thought pieces, I think that's true. And handmaidens to big government, I don't even know what that means.
Well,
they are more liberal. I mean, there are people in journalism who are more liberal. We have conservatives who build bridges. So, they build bridges, and we like to build them right. And we have people that tend to be more liberal that go into journalism. But if you're a journalist, if you are not a opinion piece writer, is to report the news. And that's what they have to be careful of, because more and more Americans think that they don't do it. But there's one other side to this, and that is we as consumers are not particularly interested in very much in-depth pieces. We've got our smartphones. We go for headlines called clicks for cash, and that media has to avoid clicks for cash so they can make money by just running stories to get our attention, right? I mean, think about it.
Yeah, not to mention fake news on their sites. I mean, fake news that's click-through.
Look, I've been the subject of fake news, and I didn't know really what it was. And, they have to be careful. Now, on their sites, putting up fake news, no, that's the Facebook controversy.
Well, Governor...
And on Facebook, people are putting stuff up that isn't true. What fake news is going up on what are you talking about?
We call it fake book.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about fake news advertising on websites. On news websites, and we can send you screenshots, the amount of revenue that legitimate news agencies, I'm not talking about ABC or NBC, CBS being illegitimate. I'm talking about if you look at what the advertising around their actual news stories, it's fake news, and they generate revenue from that fake news. So on the one hand, they're decrying it, on the other hand, they're not trying to eliminate it from their own sites because it's a revenue generator, and that's a legitimate point.
I think you have to. I think that's back to values, right? That's back to. You should not, and this is one of the things I talk about in the book, is that you should not forget the values that your mother and father taught you in an effort to promote yourself. And if, in fact, that's the case, that's repugnant. Nobody should be putting fake news up or crazy claims or whatever in order to generate revenue, whether you're in the media or whether you're in business, right? I mean, when you take a look at some of the things we see in business, EpiPen jacking up the price, Wells Fargo filing phony accounts. I mean, these are terrible things. So it's not just restricted to the media. What about the politicians that only think about re-election?
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, this is a problem in our country I don't think we're over the cliff on this at all, but I am concerned about the drift towards self-absorbment and not about thinking about your neighbor and your responsibility to them, right?
Yep. So, Governor Kasich, what fake news was written about you, and how did you handle it? Did you try to get it deleted?
I just saw one. Well, I mean, it's stuff we correct all the time, but there literally was a piece that came out of Europe about something. It was amazing when I looked at this article. It looked like really that it was real, and we don't know this, but we suspect that it came out of Eastern Europe. And what did we do about it? Nothing. Somebody told me it was placed in Wikipedia, so we went and scrubbed that. But, it's done, and how do I feel about it? Life goes on.
Well, what was the premise of the article?
I don't want to get into it.
Yeah, because it's fake news. Okay.
I want to go back to real news and the outlets you talked about, because I read all the think pieces you're talking about. I read The Atlantic. I read Vox, which is really kind of the cutting edge of leftist thought, the new generation, the Ezra Kleins and the Matt Iglesias. I read all that. I read the New York Times. I read the Washington Post. Here's my question. If 96% of the D.C. press corps that populates all those outlets that we're talking about donated to 96% of donations from that group were to the Republican candidate for president, or if since 1960, 84 to 92% of that group had voted for the Republican president for candidate, which is what they've done for the Democrat president candidate for president over that time. Do you think the news would be different? News coverage would be different?
Well, I mean, if I want to find out what I think is true in an article, and I will read multiple pieces. And I think that if I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, I get a pretty good sense of what's happening. Okay, that's kind of the way I look at it. I don't sit around saying I don't believe the news because somebody happens to be a Democrat.
No, it's not about.
Is that what it comes down?
No, it's not about. It's not about believing it. It goes back to the. It's not about fake news. It's about the editorial decisions which exhibit bias.
Well, how would you fix that?
Well, I would. We're fixing it now. More outlets. The digital age. You have the ability to build your own castle.
That's good.
But I'm not. But I don't want to pretend that the premise from the left media in D.C. is not bigger government, because it is. When was the last time you read a think piece in the Atlantic about eliminating a cabinet department, or dealing with unfunded Medicare liabilities, or rethinking Social Security? When was the last time James Fallows authored one of those pieces? Never.
Well, I will tell you that, as I said earlier, I think there are a number of people who are journalists who have a different point of view. But I've been in this business now, and I've been successful in this business. I, as a guy, fought to balance the federal budget. I don't, by and large, feel as though I have not received fair treatment from the media.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I just have to tell you. I mean, I don't think they would rate the quality of your radio show based on whether they're liberals or conservatives. Maybe some would, but so would some on the conservative side. I just have not found this to be a big problem.
Okay, well, if
I know other people worry about it because, and that feeds itself, and then conservatives say, "Oh, well, we can't believe anything." I mean, we're running into a post-truth environment.
We're
running into a point where people read only what they want to read and believe what they want to believe without opening their mind to somebody else's point of view.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I disagree that that's the approach that anybody should take. I'm just saying we should be truthful about, when somebody demonstrates who they are, I just say you believe them.
Truthful.
Yeah.
You're saying they're not being truthful.
Well, I'm saying they have a perspective.
Yeah.
I'm saying they have a perspective, and they pretend not to have a perspective. That's what I'm saying.
This argument is illustrative of the problem that we have in this country, and that is we are divided. And because we're divided, and because we're getting angry, and because we're getting cynical, we don't get anything done. So we have Republicans in charge now of Washington. They pass a short-term budget. Are they concerned about that? I don't know. Are the Democrats celebrating Republican losses more than they are their own ideas? Yeah. Do we have families fighting with one another about politics? Yes. And where does this take us? This takes us to a more angrier, more coarse, more disrespectful society. So why don't we start thinking about things that we can agree upon and then try to get things fixed? Because if we don't, the country's not moving anywhere.
What are some of those things?
I'll tell you what some of them are. The need for all of us to fight against this opiate epidemic in the neighborhoods. Our ability to, help with the things like food banks so that hungry families can get something to eat. The need to all of us, when veterans come home, in our neighborhoods and in our businesses, to make sure they can get work. These are things that are not Republican or Democrat. These are things that bring all of us together, and then once we do that, we can be a little bit more unified, and then you and I can have an argument over a drink and kind of chuckle and laugh about it and get along.
All right, you're buying.
Well, speaking, I understand what you're saying, but there is a moment for you where you could have come together and supported Donald Trump, and that was the Republican National Convention. And do you regret not showing up to an event that was in your own backyard?
No, because this was negative. This was a negative. It's somebody else's fault. We can fix all this. I'm not supporting any politicians that are negative. None. If you want to drive people into a ditch, I'm not helping you. If you're of a different philosophy, but yet you want to be a unifier, I will help you. So, sometimes in politics, just like we're having this discussion, sometimes your personal values trump your party. Kennedy said that, JFK. Sometimes my party asks too much.
We know what Teddy
I'm
did.
not going to be involved in supporting somebody that expresses the politics of division and the politics of put down and scapegoating.
Where are you on Trump 100 days in?
Well, I want him to do well. I saw some steps forward, but then I saw clips of that rally in Pennsylvania, which David Durgan said was the most divisive and negative speech by a president. I don't like that. I want him to bring the country more together. I mean, you stick on your principles. You can do that. You and I can argue about the media.
Sure.
But we don't have to dislike one another in the process. We don't have to put one another down.
Right.
So I didn't like what he did on Saturday night. He's president. His job is, as my wife once told me when I became governor, and I was starting out in a rocky way. She said, "You're the governor. You're the father of Ohio. Why don't you act like it?" And when you're a president, you have an obligation like Reagan did. Nobody stood on principle more than Reagan, but yet he brought people together in the process, and that's what I'd like to see this president do. But I want him to do well. He's the president. We live in America. And we have a lot of people that root against him every day, and I'm not one of them.
When it comes to both President Trump and the Republican majorities in Congress, where do you think between now and let's say the next 12 months as we head into the midterms, where should they spend the majority of their political capital consistent with a Kasich vision for governing America?
It's all about, if they want to do the tax cuts, I think that's good. Corporate tax rates are too high, but you can't just cut the rates without worrying about driving up the debt. I think that's really important. I think the biggest issue in the country is the slow growth of this economy. I mean, you see it in Illinois. We see it in Ohio. We need to make sure that we get this economy going by encouraging investment from businesses, reducing the prospect of higher and higher debt. I like what they're doing in many respects on the issue of regulation, because regulation can kill. And I think they ought to construct a health care reform package, but I don't think they ought to do it without including Democrats. I think those are good things, good positive things that the country would reward.
All right. He is Ohio Governor John Kasich. The new book, Two Paths, America Divided or United. Governor Kasich, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Take care.
God bless.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.